So we're in Daled Amud Aleph. The Gemara just finished relating the fascinating story of Hordus and how Bava ben Butta persuaded him to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash as a kind of teshuvah for essentially his murder rampage. And the Gemara then told us about the manner in which he got it built, how he deceived Rome in doing this 3-year-long trek of asking permission. And while waiting for the 3 years to get the permission, he went ahead and rebuilt the Beis Hamikdash. And the Gemara we concluded yesterday by saying, the Gemara said, and we can go back to that line. It's about the middle of the page. The first word in the line is Avrech. And then after that, it says the word Amri. So Amri was said, Misha loira binyan Hordus, one who has not seen the building of Hordus, loira binyan na miyamav, has never seen a beautiful building in his life. That's how beautiful the building that Hordus did when he reconstructed or refurbished the Beis Hamikdash temple, which of course, as I mentioned yesterday, the kaisel we have today is from Hordus. You can see, you can probably Google it and find rebuildings, models of it, of the Beis Hamikdash as Hordus built it. And it wasn't just the building; it's a whole complex. The entirety of the Harabais was redone. He built himself like a palace along the southern side. So when you're facing the Kaisel to the right, where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is today, up there he built like a long running palace that went from west to east. It's like this huge palace, and the building of the Beis Hamikdash is so impressive that palace was basically built for him to host foreign dignitaries and hold meetings, so that they would be impressed by him. While it put him in a better position. He's negotiating, overlooking this massive, beautiful, impressive structure with thousands or millions of people coming in and out. So it kind of put himself in a good negotiating position to have this kind of grandeur. It's just from a historical perspective. But the Gemara here says that if you've never seen the building that he built, you've never seen a beautiful building in your life. Now the Gemara says, the Mai B'niyah, with what did he build the Beis Hamikdash? Amar Rabba says, Ba'avnei Shisha u Mirma. So based on Rashi's translations and a little help from Rabbi Steinsaltz, this is white and green marble. That's the marble he used to build the Beis Hamikdash. Ikadamri, others say, it wasn't just white and green. Ba'avni kuchla shisha umirma. It was blue, green, and white. Now, how did he get these big, tall structures to stand? So the big question that everybody asks, that the archaeologists ask, the Gemara does not answer, which is, how did he move these stones? If you've ever taken a tunnel's tours, you'll know that some of these stones are massive. And even modern machines would have a very hard time moving these things. They're more like boulders than they are like rocks or stones. But even the ones that are at the Kaisel level, meaning the level, when you go to the Kaisel Plaza, you're really in the middle of the Kotel. The Kotel is much lower. Right, Yerushalayim is like cities built on cities, because every time someone came to conquer the city and destroyed it, they didn't flatten it and build; they just built on top of the rubble. So you essentially have like layers and layers of just history. As you dig down, you go farther, you go older and older, because city built on top of a city. So the current plaza is something like, I don't know, maybe 50 feet taller than the actual base of the wall. And as you get lower, the stones are bigger. So if you take that Kaisel tunnel tours down, these boulders are huge. And even like using modern machinery, would be very difficult to move them. So the Gemara does not explain how you move them, which is the big question. But the Gemara does explain how he had them stay put. And he explained, Apik Safa, Ba'ayil Safa. He had the stones aligned in such a way that the back end of the stone, every other stone was bigger than the one before it. So the front side is what's the word? Is flat, is flush. The front of the stones are flush, whereas the back of the stone, every other stone is a bit wider or pops out a bit more than the other stone. So it's in, out, the back on the back side. The front is flat, the back side is in, out. And when you have that kind of ricochet, I think that's the word, like when it goes in and out, then the nikbal sida. So that way the plaster or cement on the back will hold, right? Because putting cement between the two stones on these massive heavy boulders aren't going to do much. So he has to have like this thick layer of plaster behind to hold it in place. And he did that by having every other stone bigger than the other. So it went in and out in the back. And then you have this thick cement on the side where basically the stones are sticking into them. But every other one is popping in and out, holding it in place. That was his architectural, I guess, idea or genius. Okay. The Gemara says, Savar, he had this idea. This is Hordus. He had this idea. The Meshaya, there's a correction here on the side from the Bach, Mechbaya, which means basically to cover it or to plate it, Bedahava, with gold. He wanted to cover the whole structure in gold. The green, white, and blue marbles weren't grand enough. He needed to have it covered in gold. So Amrulay, they told him, Shafke, it's enough. You don't have to go overboard. The marble is good enough. The Hachi Shaperte, because this is actually better without the gold. The Mechze, because it looks, Kiadafta Diyama, it looks like the waves of the ocean. This is with Rashi's help translation. The waves of the ocean. Right? Because from afar, you see these colors, and you know how like marble is kind of wavy. You see green, white, and blue in this kind of wavy mesh. From a distance, it looks like you're looking at an ocean from a distance. So they told him it actually looks much, to use a modern term, looks cooler if you didn't put gold. So they convinced him not to cover it in gold. So this is the Gemara's comment on his building. It's one of them. Now the Gemara asks, so this whole story was introduced because the Gemara, the halachas we're coming from is the halacha of Beis HaMikdash, of a shul, which is you're not allowed to destroy a shul unless you built another shul in its place. And the Gemara asked how Bambuta was allowed to advise Hordus to destroy the Beis HaMikdash and then rebuild it when he's violating this halacha. So the Gemara now asks another problem with Baba Bambuta's behavior, which is the following. Ubab Barbuta and Baba, son of and Baba Babuta, Heichi Abed Hachi, how could he do this? How could he Bechlal advise Hordus in a teshuvah? Va'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav. The Item and others say it wasn't Rav Yehuda's in the name of Rav, it was Rabbi Shub and Levi who said, Daniel. Why was Daniel punished? The Gemara is going to tell us in a moment what exactly the punishment that Hashem gave him was. But Daniel was punished. Daniel, of course, is one of the prophets that exist, that live just before the story of Purim. The book of Daniel is written between the first and second Beis HaMikdash, and it's during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, which is a little before, which is Achashverosh's predecessor. So it's just before Purim. So Daniel was punished. Why? In the Gemara, again, we'll see in a moment what the punishment was. Because he gave Nebuchadnezzar good advice. And he shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have given this wicked man such good advice. So where do we see that he gave him advice? Shneimar, because the pasuk says, Lahan, the book of Daniel, Lahain, sorry, the book of Daniel is written in Aramaic. So Lahain, Malka, and therefore my king, Malche Yishbar, Allah, you should heed my advice. So this is after Nebuchadnezzar has this wild vision in a dream, and he calls the interpreters to interpret his dream. Nobody can interpret it in a satisfactory manner. So he calls Daniel, and Daniel interprets the dream to tell him that the dream that he sees a dream with a big tall tree, and the tree is cut down. There's all the details there. It's a very, a lot of interesting imagery in Daniel, and this is one of these visions. And Daniel tells him that this is a prophecy about you, you're getting cut down. And at the conclusion of telling him the interpretation of the dream, then Daniel goes beyond the scope of his responsibilities. His responsibilities are to relay Hashem's words to whoever it is he's supposed to relay to, in this case, Nebuchadnezzar. And he goes beyond that and gives him advice. And he says, Lahain, therefore, Malka, King, Malchai, my advice, Yishbar Alecha, you should heed my advice. And your sin, Bitstaka Proik, you should redeem your sin with tzedakah. Vavasich, Vavasoyich, and your iniquities, Bimichan Anoyin, you should take care of them with grace, or with grace towards the poor. And then hey teve arka malka, then you will have saying arka lishal lish levasach. Then there'll be length to your rulership. I'm looking at the Hebrew, the proper pronunciation from my Gemara here on the side quotes the full psukim with Nekudos. Anyway, so Daniel gave him advice. Says, look, God's about to cut you down because of your misbehavior. So here's my advice: start doing tzedakah, start being nice to the poor, and you'll be okay. Then it says, a few psukim later, actually the very next pasuk, Koila mita al Nebuchadnezzar malka v'ksiv v'laptzas. Where is that? It says Koila mata al Nebuchadnezzar malka. All of the stuff in your dream are about to happen to you. All the terrible stuff about to happen to you. But ulakates yarchim treyaser. But it only happened to him only 12 months later. And the reason why it happened 12 months later. The reason why it happened to him 12 months later is because he listened to Daniel's advice. So Daniel gave him advice to behave, and because he behaved, the punishment that Hashem said he would give to him in his dream only came to fruition 12 months later. So this advice from Daniel saved him for 12 months, and this was a mistake. And this is what he was punished for. The Gemara can tell us later what his punishment was, but this is the punishment. So the question becomes, how is Bava Buta allowed to give her this advice after such terrible behavior? It was a massacre. He killed all the Chashmonaim, then he killed the Chachamim, and other crazy things he's done with the daughter of the Chashmonaim, preserving her in honey, the sadistic stuff. And now he's giving him advice and giving him a way out. This is a mistake. Just like Daniel made the mistake and got punished for giving the Nebuchadnezzar advice and delaying God's punishment for 12 months. So the Gemara gives two possible answers for why Bava Buta was allowed to give her this advice. Ibai Sema, there are those that say, Shaimi Avda, that Hordus, even though, as I mentioned before, there's a bit of controversy exactly as to the status of Hordus in terms of his Jewishness, but Avda, he was definitely a slave. He was a slave to the Chashmonaim, and as a slave, he's chayiv b'mitzvahs. He's obligated at least in some of the mitzvahs. And because he's obligated in some of the mitzvahs, he still, in some ways, is partially Jewish, right? A slave is partially Jewish while he's a slave, and then even a non-Jewish slave. And then after he leaves his slavery, he becomes a full Jew, right? The conversion process of a slave begins at the beginning of his slavery and ends as he is freed. So at whatever stage you put Hordus in, he's certainly a slave of the Chashmonaim, and therefore certainly has some sort of status as a Jew. He has some mitzvahs he's obligated in, and therefore you're allowed to give him advice to help him do teshuvah. But this Nebuchadnezzar guy, that was a mistake. And the Ibois Ema and others say the reason why I was allowed to give him advice wasn't because of his status of a Jew or not being a Jew, but rather shiny base of Migdash, but because of what was at stake. In the case of Daniel, he gave Nebuchadnezzar advice, and who benefited from the advice? Just Nebuchadnezzar. But in the case of Hordus, when Bava Buta gave Hordus advice, the Beis Hamikdash was rebuilt. So everybody benefited. And that's why I was allowed to give him the advice, even though Taka was clemency for Hordus, which maybe he wasn't supposed to offer. But on the other hand, there was this major benefit that we got the Beis Hamikdash restored. And as I said, the remnant, most of the remnant we have from the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim is thanks to this whole episode with Hordus and Bava Buta. As the Gemara comments, Deloi Malchus, because if not for sovereignty, if not for the government, if not for the king, in this case Hordus, Loi Metavni would never be built. It would have stayed in that dilapidated state as it was before Hordus did construction. So now the Gemara makes a comment on exactly where Daniel was punished. Daniel himself, how do we know he was punished? Who said he was punished? And here's where the Gemara comes in the comment about the story of Purim. This is a fascinating little detail of the story. Ilema, there are those that suggest that the punishment for Daniel was Mishum Diksiv, based on that which the Pasuk says in Esther, Vatikra Esther lahatach, or lahasach. The Esther calls this person Hasach, who was placed, right? Right? Esther had this attendant named Hasach or Hatach, and Esther's constantly sending this person to communicate to Mordechai, to find out why he's in sackcloth and ashes, what's he doing, constantly communicating through this Hatach. So who is this Hatach? Rav says, Hatach is Daniel. Hatach is Daniel. And that's his punishment. That he was demoted from being the Nebuchadnezzar's advisor and in the high society of the court to becoming an attendant to the queen. So this is a little fascinating detail of the story of Purim. When you read the Megillah and you see this person Hatach, it's actually Daniel. Mamish Daniel from scripture. I mentioned Daniel just before Esther. It's right. It's just before the story of Purim. So he's still alive. So the Gemara says, this is all well according to the opinion which says that the reason why he's called Hatach comes from the word to cut. Because he was cut down from his greatness. He used to be this great advisor, and now he's just a simple attendant. So then now we understand the punishment. But according to the opinion which says the reason why he was called Hatach, this is a machlekes in the Gemara Megillah, the reason why he was called Hatach is not because he was cut down, but rather because all the words of the king are cut on his word. In other words, that's the Gemara's out. All the words of the king are cut al piv on his words. So it's actually a high status, not a low status. So what can you say of the punishment? What's the punishment for Daniel in being Hatach or being this attendant to Queen Esther? Even as an attendant, according to this other opinion, all the words of the king that come from are go through him. So he hasn't lost any major status. So what exactly is the punishment Daniel suffered? Says the Gemara, after the Shadyu Lagoiva the Aravaisa, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but he was punished in the fact that he was thrown into the lion's den. The fact that he was thrown into the lion's den is punishment for advising Nebuchadnezzar. Now, I haven't seen this clearly, but this is a suggestion of mine. This is a suggestion. So obviously it's up for disagreement. But both of these quote-unquote punishments of Daniel turn out to be fabulous things. The fact that he was thrown into the lion's den is one of the greatest miracles of all time. He survived in the lion's den. The fact that he became Hatach, or he was cut down, he became instrumental in the story of Purim. So, I mean, it's a punishment technically, but it's very weak in terms of as far as punishments go. And both of them become instrumental for a miracle. And Ula Yesh Leimar, that the reason is because advice that helps someone do teshuvah is not from the worst averos you can do. Now, if the aveda they're going to get you for is that you gave someone who's terrible advice to do teshuvah, it's okay. You can have such an aveda, and you'll get punished, and the punishment itself will turn into a miracle. You'll be stuck in the lion's den, and you'll be saved, or you'll become hatach, and you'll become an instrumental to the whole story of another salvation of the Jews in Purim. So that's a suggestion. Okay, let's learn the Tosafos here, since it's about Purim. Let's see the Tosafos on the top of the page, Daled and Aleph, and then we'll go to the next one. So the Tosafos quotes in the top of page, that one of the opinions as to why Daniel was called Hatach is not in the negative, but in the positive, and that all the words of the king are cut on his word. So says the Tosafos, Lafi Targum Shalach HaShredosh, according to the Targum, the translation, like on the side of the Chumash we have Targum Onkelos and the Targum Yonason. So there's a Targum on the Megillah on Achashverosh. According to that Targum, Nenash Harbe, he was killed. He was punished much worse than the punishments described here. The punishments described here are that he was demoted or that he was thrown into the lion's den. But according to this Targum, he was punished much worse. Shenerag, he was actually killed. Daniel was killed, according to this opinion. Because the pasuk says, divrei Esther. When Mordechai first tries to persuade Esther to go to the king, and Esther says, I don't want to go because I'm scared. I haven't been called to the king in such a long time. I'm afraid of the consequences. And so Esther sends a message back saying, I'm sorry, I can't, I'm not doing it. So it says there, the words of Esther were told to Mordechai. And by that verse, it doesn't say Hatach. It doesn't say that Hatach came and told her. Ordinarily, the messages are going back and forth between Hatach or Hasach, however you pronounce it. But here, in this instance, when Esther is telling Mordechai that I don't want to see the king, Hatach is not mentioned. It just says Vayagidu, And Mordechai was told, without saying who. So the Targum over there says, because Haman killed him. Haman killed Daniel, or Hatak. Why? Because he was taking messages back and forth between Mordechai and Esther. And this is Haman's way of trying to sabotage his enemies. He sabotages enemies by killing the messenger between them. So according to the Targum, Daniel was actually killed by Haman. But what about our Gemara? Why doesn't our Gemara mention this? Why doesn't our Gemara mention that Daniel was killed? And Tosafos' answer is going to further support my contention. So Miu Gemara Shalanu, but our Gemara, Eino Tosafos came, doesn't take this opinion that Haman had Daniel killed. Why? Because the Gemara says in Megillah, which our Gemara will be consistent with the Gemara in Megillah. Over there it says that the Gemara asks the same question, where did Hatach go? If Hatach, why does the Pasuk say? But the same question that the Targum says. The Pasuk says by Yigidu as Divrei Mordechai Esther, that the words were told to Mordechai. So why doesn't it mention Hatach came to say the message? The Targum said because he was killed. The Gemara asks the same question. The Gemara answers, the Gemara answers, because we don't want, because the Pasuk doesn't want to associate negative news with Hatach. The negative news that Esther is refusing Mordechai's request to go to the king, Hatach didn't want to be part of that messaging. And that's why the Pasuk doesn't mention Hatach. So this Vaita supports my idea that Hatach is actually in some sense positive, because he's not even being used to relay negative news. Okay, so that's so far the Gemara's comments on Hordus, and then the relating comments about Daniel and the story of Purim. Now we get back to the original sugya of the Gemara, the sugya of the wall being built between two neighbors. So we're going to learn a few lines in the Gemara, and then we're going to look at Tzemach Tzedek. So first the Gemara quotes the Mishnah, which says, "Hakol kaminig Medina," that the Mishnah listed 4 different types of walls that might be built between neighbors. Gvil, gazes, kfisin, and livnin, 2 types of stone and 2 types of brick. And then the Mishnah said, Hakol kaminig Medina, everything must be done in accordance with the local community. So this is a question the Gemara often asks, which is Hakol asiyei mai. When you say everything, what are you coming to include? You've already listed a bunch of minhagim. Now you added Hakol. It must be that there's some minhag that you're not including in the list. Otherwise, why would you say Hakol? Why would you add that? Lasiyei mai, what are you coming to add? This is often the Gemara's question when the Mishnah says this language, Hakol. Everything follows something. Like you always do this, as if it's something in addition to what has been listed. So Lasiyei mai, what is it coming to add? Answers the Gemara, Lasiyei, it's coming to incorporate Asra, a location, the Nahagi, where the minhag is, Bahutza v'dafna, where they use what we've been translating until now, spikes. But Hutz v'dafna, more specifically, according to Rashi, and again with the help of Rabbi Steinsaltz, is Dafna, Hutz says Izni, Rashi says Lulavi de Kolam. You can see the Rashi there on the right. I didn't go through all the Rashis in the story because they're mostly translations of the words, which I explained as we learned the story. But so Rashi there on the right, it's a little bit farther up in the Gemara, but it says Bahutza Lulavi de Kolam. So that's easy. It's a lulav from a palm tree, the palm tree sticks. But v'dafna, it says anfei eitz armoinin shekardin lur uprishaloi kardin baish. Okay, so I don't know what a lur is and I don't know what a baish is. Anyway, but Rabbi Steinsaltz translated as laurel, a laurel tree, apparently. Okay, the bottom line is it's just the sticks in the ground. And the Mishnah is coming to say that if that's the local custom, then you can do that between you and your neighbor. And this is something we've discussed quite a bit in the previous Gemaras, how at the bare minimum, especially in the different cases we learned in the past, that at the bare minimum, there must be some sort of partition between the two, even if it's just going to be bushes, even if it's just going to be a bunch of sticks lined up to prevent hezek re'iyah, or even if not to prevent hezek re'iyah, just by the very fact of making a demarcation line of where the property line ends. Okay, now we get to the Gemara, which says, this is the Gemara we discussed a number of times. Because the Gemara, I kept on referring to this Gemara. So we discussed it a number of times, but here's the actual Gemara. And then we're going to learn the Tzemach Tzedek. And the Tzemach Tzedek is going to do 2 things. First of all, it's a very geschmack piece in the Tzemach Tzedek. Actually, 3 things. First of all, it's teaching from our Rabbi, so whenever you have the opportunity to introduce that, we take the opportunity with glee. That's first of all. Also, it happens to also be a very geschmacka piece. And then it'll also serve as a kind of reminder and recap of this whole sugya of the lefichach, which will help us as we segue into the next sugyas, which are in some ways related to the lefichach. So the Mishnah said, lefichach, therefore, therefore, if the wall fell many years later, then the space that was used to build the wall and the stone that was used to build the wall belongs to two neighbors equally. And as we learned in the Gemara, as we learned in the Mishnah, both from Rashi and from Tosafos, I'll just do a little reminder. Rashi said that because the Chachamim obligated them to build equally between the two, so because the law says they have to build between the two, therefore, even if we don't have any record of the law, and all we have in front of us is two neighbors with a fallen wall in between, we know that as a matter of fact, the law obliges them to split the property. Therefore, even without any proof, or even with proof to the contrary, at least somewhat, even with claims to the contrary, the space in the wall is split because we know we obligated them to build a wall in between. That was Rashi's lashon. Tosafos, on the other hand, gave a little bit different, more elaborate, and explained. If it's because of hezek re'iyah, and the halacha of hezek re'iyah proves that it must have been between. And if hezek re'iyah is lav shmei hezek, then anan sadi, we are witnesses that because they could compel each other, they certainly did compel each other. And therefore, even if we have no record, we can safely assume and we testify to the fact that certainly they compelled each other. Because they could compel each other. Right? Oh, I'm sorry. That was if hezek re'iyah shmei hezek. If hezek re'iyah shmei hezek, where they could compel each other, so then certainly they compelled each other. But in terms of, if it's hezek re'iyah shmei hezek, it's because we remember that they made a kinyan with each other. Right? We have a record of them making a kinyan with each other. Yes. We remember that they made a kinyan with each other, and that's why we're splitting it. Yeah.
When you say we have a record of them making a kinyan, so it's only when there's some sort of, I don't know if there's an edus to it or a shtar or something about it.
So Rashi says no, a shtar. I don't think a shtar because Tosafos just says Yadu alanu v'adayin zocher. It's known to us and we still remember. That's what I said. Maybe it's Adam.
It's public knowledge. Yeah.
Public knowledge,
it's just public knowledge.
Or it's a matter of record in the Bezdin. Yeah. Okay, so the Gemara asked, Pshita, obviously they split the property. So what's the pshat, obviously? Obviously takes into consideration even the law. Which means the pshita is being asked that l'churda, you don't need the law. You don't need the law to compel us to split the property. It would have been split even if you didn't have the law to compel them. That's what the word pshita means. So let's see Rashi as he explains it. Pshita, look on the right side, the words of Rashi are important here. Pshita, it's obvious that the wall and the space is split evenly between the two neighbors. Pshita da'avanim shashneim. Obviously, the stone belongs to both of them. Why does Rashi leave out the word hamakim? Not sure. But Pshita, it's obvious. Da'avanim shashneim, the stones belong to the two of them. Why? Da'afilu loy pasak alon dina. The masnisan, even if we were not to have the psak of our Mishnah. Hamalamdenu, which teaches us that to begin with, they built it between the two of them. Al karcham, even so, we would split it evenly. Ha'avonim, again Rashi says, ha'avonim, the stones. Why? Because it's resting in the place of both of them. The yad mimehem together, and whose hand would be more, whose claim is greater, literally whose hand is stronger. So in keeping in line with more questions and answers, okay, so let's just learn the Rashi before we get to our questions. The answer is, Rashi is saying like this: even without the law, we would still split the wall. because it's sitting on both of their properties. And the very fact that it's sitting on both their properties is why we split the wall. Yeah, what do you say?
It seems,
Yeah.
I mean, the way I that it's like a bit circular, right?
Okay, how so?
Because if it's sitting on both, to be sitting on both the property, it needs to be right dafka in the middle, because we know that if there was a wall, then it was split somehow. And if it was split in the middle, like it fell on one side and the other side. But if you're taking the presence of the wall to know that it was in the middle, but we don't know it's in the that there was an agreement that it was in the middle yet. You know what I'm saying? What if they agreed it should be 2/3, 1/3?
I think you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Rashi is assuming we know where the property line ends. Rashi is assuming we know where the property line ends.
But he's not, because he's discounting the previous statement. Like we just saw that, if it's a matter of public knowledge, but he's saying it's not. This is not a matter of public knowledge.
This is Tosafos right? Said that, right? Tosafos said that why do we split the property if it's why do we split the property if it's hezek v'lashmi hezek? Because we know that they made a kinyan with each other.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, so Rashi's just assuming we know where the property line is. Okay, fine.
Let's look at
which means if we're talking about an agreement, then he's assuming also that there was a kinyan.
Rashi says we don't need it. It's sitting on their property, so it's both of theirs. It's sitting on their property. Look at the Rashi. Look at the words of Rashi again, very precisely. Pshita, it's obvious. That the stones belong to both of them.
Okay, just the Avanim. Okay,
yes, the Avanim. And you'll see again, he says just the Avanim. Here's where the only place where he says that where he makes mention of the location is in the following, right here. The Avanim Shoshneim. It's obvious that the stone belongs to both of them. I feel like pasuk long din of the masnisa. Even if we didn't have the din of our Mishnah, Hamalam Deni, which teaches us shemitchil at the beginning, bein shnei masua, that between the two of them they built it. This is the only time Rashi makes mention of the property line. Even without the Mishnah telling us that you have to build it halfway between each property line, al karcham, we would still split them. Again, Rashi highlights the avodim. We would also split the stone because they are lying on both of their properties. The yad them to govern, and whose hand will be stronger. So why do I need to rely on the din? The very fact that it's sitting on their property is already enough to split, which assumes that we know where the property line ends. The pashtus. Okay, so says the Gemara right there. We're gonna do the Haggah in a minute. But let's learn the Gemara. The Gemara's answer. Like, it's not obvious. We need the din of our Mishnah to say it. We need the lefichach. Why? In a case where the wall fell onto one of the two properties. So if it's one of the two properties, inami or depaninu, if one person actually took it and put it into his property today on his own side, I might have thought, because now it's sitting on my property, that the other guy whose wall the property is not on, whose property the wall is not on, is now the one who's extrapolating money from me, and therefore the burden of proof is on him. Right? That's the general rule. The burden of proof is on the one who's trying to extrapolate money. So if the wall is on my side, the other guy's trying to take away my money, and therefore he's got to prove. So this all falls in line with Rashi, which is that the reason why we knew it was obvious is because the wall is on both their properties. That's how we know it's obvious. Answer, it's not on both their properties. It's only on one guy's property. That's the answer. It's on one guy's property, right? But the question then becomes, like, and this is the Tosafos' question, right? This is going back to the original Tosafos on the Gemara, on the Mishnah. Tosafos' question is, well, even if it falls on one guy's side, it's still obvious. Because it was there 5 minutes ago, it was on both of their properties. Right? And the fact that it fell into one guy's side doesn't give him a better claim. You can't like undo somebody else's halacha, because I can't walk into your house, take your stuff, put it in my house, and then say it's mine. That's just theft. So you can't just because it happens to be put on my side, therefore the other guy lost his claim. This is Tosafos' big question, right? To which Tosafos says, you're right. In that case, the guy has no claim. The claim only becomes if it's been sitting for such a long time, beyond the point of which partners are comfortable with each other holding the other guy's property. Beyond that point, now it's talking not pshit anymore, and that's where the lefichach comes in. Which means without the lefichach, the fact that it's been sitting on my property for so long is proof that it belongs to me. Comes the lefichach and says, no, because you built the lechatchila together, we know it's both of yours. Right? This is what Tosafos said back then. Remember this or not so much? Please, if it's not for not ringing a bell, interrupt me. Right? But Rashi doesn't really make mention of that. So let's see the Haggah now. And maybe this is what the Haggah is addressing. Haggah. Pirush Rabbeinu Chananel explains. Kamash Malon, the Gemara is coming to teach us that when the wall falls onto one person's side, or one person takes the stones and puts it on his side, the Gemara is teaching me the loy ba'in naya, that you don't need to bring a proof that you are a partner. The other partner can take his half without bringing any proof. Ordinarily, if the items are on your property, so I have to bring the burden of proof is on me because I'm extrapolating from you. And the Xidush is that I don't have to do that. Why? The EU, the time, and I don't have to bring proof. But the other guy, the time, the delay, the guy who has the wall fall on his side, and he claims the whole thing belongs to him. Allah haraya, he has to bring a raya. The chol kahai gavna, hachi daininon, and anything similar to this, we have the same halacha. Meaning when two partners own something, and it ends up on one guy's, and the item happens to end up in one of the two partners' property, then the other partner doesn't have to bring a proof that it belongs to him because they're partners. Right? The same thing is true in the beginning of the Perek Abayis Valiyah, which is a Perek in Bava Metzia. This is mentioned in the first Tosafos also, where two people have a partnership in a home. One guy's got the top floor, one guy's at the bottom floor, and it falls, we split the stuff in the middle. Right? Okay, so I'm not really sure how to read the next words, but let's see. Ibois Ema, or perhaps you can suggest. Okay, so this is one way of understanding the Kamash Malon. One way of understanding is that the other guy doesn't have to bring a raya. Why? Because they're shutuf. They're partners. Doesn't really explain why. Let's see. So Iba Isema, I'm not sure how this is another answer. It seems to me an extension. But anyway, the Shutfin Kahai Gavna, partners like these, Anuchi Avonaber Shus Chavere, is happy to leave stones in his friend's property, and like Koptin, he doesn't mind. The Cheskes Rishus Lav Klum, the Chazaka of your property is nothing. And Shamina Minei, and that's the Chiddush here. So I guess the difference is, I'm not sure what the subtle difference is. The first explanation is that because maybe the first explanation is like this, because it was on my property, the fact that it's in your property now doesn't ruin my chazaka. The second way of understanding it is that Bechlau, Shutfin don't mind when their Shutif is holding on to the item. And this is what we learn from here. The Cholka Hai Gavna, anything like this, the Milsa the other B'Shutfase, Tavayu, something which is known to be shutfus between two people, even though it happens to be physically in one person's property. One guy can't say it's in my property because it's mine because it's in my property. Because the Kaimalon, because we paskin that shutfin like up yadadi. Partners are not scrupulous about this. They don't mind if their partner holds on to something. What I think that Rabbeinu Hanan is trying to get here, what the Saga is trying to get to, is I think Okay, so before I go further, I just want to make sure this Haggadah is clear. So, right, Rashi only gave us the question, didn't give us the answer. Okay, I have to get to Tzemach Tzedek. But Rashi just gave the question. But the question was, what's Pshita? It's Pshita because the Avonim are on our space, so certainly it's split. The Gemara answers, no, it's on one guy's space. But what's the answer? That's also obvious. So the Haggadah seems to be saying that this quote-unquote obvious din is derived from here. The first thing is that because it was always between the two of you, even though it's on one side, we always paskin universally, because of this, because it was on both of yours, that you split later. And the second answer is that we're learning from here that shutfin don't mind when the other shutfin holds on to the item. And this seems to me that he's trying to avoid Tosafos' question. Because Tosafos says that it's so obvious that even if it's on my side, it belongs to me, that I don't need the lefichach. And what's the lefichach for? The lefichach for is shows man harbe. It was there for so long that the shutfin would care ordinarily, but because there's a lefichach, because there was halacha, you had to build it together. Anan sadi, we are witnesses, and therefore we split it evenly, even though it's been sitting there for way too long. And it seems that the Rabbi Chananel is trying to avoid that. That this Haggadah is trying to avoid that. By saying even the split right now is the Chiddush of our Mishnah, not just in years from now. But even the split right now as it falls is the Chiddush. Because we're learning from here that shutfin don't mind when the item is sitting on the other guy's property. I'm missing something, but l'chura, this is, anyway, again, the floor is open, but this is the way I understand it. Okay, we have some time. Let's go to the Tzemach Tzedek. If something's not clear, please make it known now, because I want to go forward in the Tzemach Tzedek.
Saying if partners are not makbid, so then it wouldn't bother them that it sits in the other guy's rishus.
So, but is that the Chiddush of our Mishnah? Or is that the assumption before you read our Mishnah? If it's the assumption that before you read our Mishnah, then when the Mishnah teaches a din lefichach, there has to be something new being added here. And that's what Tosafos learns. Tosafos says that the fact that shutfin don't care is we knew this before we started the Mishnah. And if the Mishnah says lefichach, and therefore, because you split it to begin with, therefore now we're compelling you to split it now. Therefore, because we compelled you to build it together, therefore you split it now. That means there's a chiddush beyond the fact that shutfin don't care. What's the chiddush? Shows man harbe. It sat there for a very long time. But that's only if this idea of shutfin not being makbid is known to you before the Mishnah. But it would seem from Rabbi Chananel that this idea, from the Haggadah, it would seem that this idea that shutfin aren't makbid is itself the chiddush of the lefichach. That itself is the chiddush of the lefichach, not in addition to that.
That they're not makbid when it sits a long time, but not that it happens right away.
Or they're not makbid at all. Right? I didn't want to say something.
No, just thinking it out.
Yeah. Yeah. So, look, we know shutfin aren't makbid. We know shutfin are not makbid when they have things in the other guy's property. The question is that something that the Mishnah has to be machadish to you? Does the Mishnah have to teach you that shutfin aren't makbid? If the answer is no, then the lefichach has to be teaching you something new. Right? The lefichach is teaching you that because when they first built it, we compelled them to build, therefore, 20 years later, when it falls, we split the stone in the property. Now, if we always knew that shutfin don't care, then obviously split this property. I don't need the lefichach. Even if it fell into one guy's side, because shutfin aren't makbid. So what's the lefichach teaching you? An extreme case where shutfin might be makbid. Show harbe, it sat there for a long time, and shutfin might be makbid. But because lefichach, because we told them lechatchila to build it, therefore anan sadi, we are witnesses. Let's look at Tosafos. Go back. Let's look at the Tosafos, not the whole entire Tosafos, just the end of the Tosafos. at the beginning, Beis Amud Aleph, the first Tosafos there, the Tosafos of Lefichach. So let's see what Tosafos says. Pirush. Pirush. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines from the end of the Tosafos. Pirush. This means to say, the show b'reshusay harbe. It stayed in the reshus for a long time. Ma'al I would have thought, even the show b'reshusay harbe, because it stayed for such a long time. Now we should believe him. So kula, when he says lechatchila, I built it myself. We should believe him because he left it, because it's there for so long. Why? Migu di boy amar mimcha lakachti. It's been sitting here for such a long time that I could claim I bought it from you. V'haya neman, and he would have been believed mishum the show harbe, because it's been sitting here for so long. And you cannot claim shutfin aren't makbid because it's been too long, right? And therefore, the show harbe. I forgot the amar. But even though we say shutfin loy kap yadadi, hachamari the show yismak der gilus. It's been sitting here for too long, and the otimishum the shutfin ninu, because they're partners like yakbid ad olam. Therefore, I never mind if the guy holds on to it forever. There's a limit to how long I want it to sit in the other guy's property, right? So Tosafos is learning that the Mishnah already assumes we know that shutfin aren't makbid because we learned in Abayis Valiyah. Now, everybody's like, what's the lefichach teaching you? If we already know shutfin aren't makbid, and tell me that you're teaching me that when it's in my property, you still split. If it's in my property, shutfin aren't makbid. Must be show harbe. It's been sitting for so long, and it's sitting for so long that I could have claimed miglu. I could have claimed I bought it from you. It's been sitting here for so long, and because you would have believed me had I said I bought it, therefore you should believe me when I say I built it. Lechatchila comes the Gemara and says lefichach no. Because at the beginning we compelled you. It's migu b'makom edim. You're saying a migu, and we have edim. We, the bezdin, are quote unquote. We are witnesses that you split the cost when you built it, and you're trying to undo that witness by a migu that I could have claimed I bought it because it's been sitting here for so long. No, and that's the chiddush of the Mishnah according to Tosafos. But it would seem from the Hagah that the chiddush of the Gemara itself is that shutfin like up the adad. That's the chiddush. Not that that's the assumption before the Mishnah starts.
But the problem with that is then the lefichach doesn't. The word lefichach doesn't mean anything.
Big kasha.
Right?
Good kasha. Good kasha. Meaning, it's not lefichach. You're right.
Right. Saying that. And also because they're shutfin, they split it.
Yeah. Unless it changed the lefichach. The lefichach was because of the din. And now the lefichach is lefichach because they're partners, therefore like kapti. Maybe. Right, not lefichach because of the din. But lefichach, that because they are partners, lefichach, therefore like kapti. Maybe you can explain it that way, but it's a good kasha. Okay, let's start the Tzemach Tzedek, at least a little bit start. I don't know how much we'll get through, but let's start. Okay, Gimel on the bottom here. Lefichach and Lafel, therefore if it falls. But Tosafos, Tosafos there learns that even if the stone was on one guy's side for a long time, nonetheless, his claim that I built it lechatchila is not valid, even though he has a migu that I could have said I bought it from you. It's been sitting here for so long. The migu is not valid because I'm assuming we know what the word migu means, right? Migu means that I could have said something else. So when I claim that I built it lechatchila, I'm validating my claim because I could have claimed I bought it from you. It's been sitting here for so long that it would make sense that I bought it from you. It's been sitting here for the last 8 months. And because you would have believed me when I said that I bought it from you, therefore you should believe me when I say I built it lechatchila 20 years ago. But amigu doesn't work in the place of Adam. When you have witnesses that deny what you're saying, the amigu doesn't work. And over here we have witnesses. Who are the witnesses? We are the witnesses. We, the bezdin, are the witnesses that lechatchila we obligated you to build it. And the fact that you saying that I could have claimed I bought it is invalid because we are witnesses. Okay. Now, We're going to leave that bika out for now. So Tosafos Tzemach tells us to look up two Maggid Mishnahs, which Tosafos Tzemach himself is going to quote, so we don't have to look them really up. Ein b'Maggid Mishnah, Perek Beis Mishchenim, Din Tezayin. Look in chapter 2, Halacha Tezayin, Maggid Mishnah in Rambam. The Maskal Afichach, V'Din Yudches, the Maskal V'Hoyo. Okay, look those up, and Tzemach is going to quote the relevant sections soon. Now, V'Zel Losh in Piskei Tosafos Ois Beis. The Piskei Tosafos, which takes all the Piskei Dinim of the Pilpulim of Tosafos, says as follows: Shutfin like Kapti. The Piskei Tosafos concludes, based on Tosafos, that Shutfin are not makbid, Elika Shober Shusei Harbe. But if it's too long, then they are makbid, right? Because the whole Tosafos' premise is built on the fact that it's been sitting on my property beyond how long I would be makbid, and because I am now makbid, it's been sitting in your property for so long. That's the raya that you have, that either you bought it or that you built it lechatchila. It's been sitting for so long, beyond the point of kpeda. Right? So there's a chiddush in Tosafos that this shutfin like Kapti Adadi has limitations. After too long, then they are makbid. And that's the Piskei Tosafos quotes. Mavur, so it comes out to the Tzemach Tzedek, the Kishashov, Shusei Harbe, that if it stays for too long, Kapti, they do mind. I don't mind, we're partners, we co-own whatever it is. We co-own a Sefer Torah. I don't mind if you hold on to it, but if you hold on to it forever and I never get to use it, then then I do mind. I want to get some use out of it also. Okay. So this is the din that comes out of Tosafos. The imkain, and if so, if it's taka sitting on my property for too long, and I can no longer claim that I don't mind you holding on to it because we're shutfin, then when I want to take my half, that I'm the one that's trying to expropriate money, and the burden of proof is on me. But even so, even though, says Tosafos, even though the wall has been sitting in my side for so long, ain't all of our raya. That itself is not enough to prove that it actually belongs to me, even though it's been sitting on my property for so long. Why? Because it's as if we have two witnesses saying it belongs to the two of you. What's the witnesses? The witnesses is the fact, is lefichach. Lefichach is the witnesses. The fact that there's a halacha which says, a din which says that when you build it, you must build it together. They are like witnesses standing in Bezdin which say you built it together. And therefore your claim to say that it's been sitting in your property for so long and therefore I've relinquished my rights is not a good claim, because there's witnesses standing here and saying that you split it. And a claim in the face of witnesses don't work, even a claim of amigu. Okay. Yeah. Now, v'chein kosav hagoyis ashri, b'simin vov. So I want to look up. Just make sure I got it right over here. Simin vov. Where is it? Oh, it's not here. Okay. Over there it says also, same din. Afilu nafel reshusay v'shor manan gadol. Even if it stayed in his property for so long, it's like migu in the place of Edom. Edom being the bezdin with the lefichach. Avalim toyim behedja. Oh, but now here comes the big question. So what's the problem? Why is the fact? Why are we not taking into consideration the fact that it's been sitting for so long beyond the point of kpeda? Why aren't we saying that? Because his whole claim is a migu. What's he claiming? When he comes to the bezdin, what is he claiming? He's claiming that lechatchila I built it myself. Now, why is it a valid claim? L'chor is not a valid claim. It's against the halacha, which is you have to split it. So why is it a valid claim? It's only a valid claim because of amigu. Because I could have said I bought it. But what if I actually did say I bought it? What if my claim is that? So now it's no longer migu b'makam edim. It's a claim that I bought it. You have edim that we split it many years ago. I'm not denying that. I'm just claiming that I bought it. And it's been sitting, and the proof is it's been sitting in my backyard for the last 12 months. What if I make that claim outright? So now it's not just a migu. You're undoing my migu, right? In other words, I say, if it's a migu where I say, look, I built it myself. And why should you believe me there when I say I built myself? Because I could have made a better claim that I bought it. But lepoyel, this claim that I built it myself is in direct conflict with the witnesses, the din, which says you have to split it. But what if I say I bought it? I'm not denying your witnesses anymore. Your lefichach, which says that you split that you must have split it lechatchila 20 years ago. I'm not denying that. I'm agreeing, yes, that we did, but now I bought it. This is a gewaldige, almost a partial Indian. So says the Tzemach Tzedek, he's still quoting the Goy's Ashri. If he claims straight out, I bought it, Neman, he'd be technically believed. It's not a nigo anymore. Because it's been sitting on my property for a very long time. So there's like a way out of the Lafichach, according to this opinion. We're going to see other opinions from Tzemach Tzedek soon. But according to this opinion, if he claims, I bought it, he is not denying the halacha, he's not denying the edim, he's not denying the Lafichach, and therefore, it's a good claim. If it hasn't been on my property for so long, even if I say I bought it, I can't say that, because it hasn't been here for so long, and shutfin lekop ya'adadi. And because shutfin lekop ya'adadi, I can't claim I bought it. I can only claim I bought it when I undo shutfin lekop ya'adadi, which is it's been sitting for so long. Okay, so this already itself is a gewaldige ing. Okay, let's do a little bit more. The Aguda writes a similar thing at the beginning of Basra. And this is the quote from the Aguda, which reads, therefore, quotes the Mishnah, that if the wall fell, the place and the stone belonged to both of them. I just remembered something. Hold on a second.
What's the rush adding here?
Sorry, I'll ask you again. Sorry?
What's the Bechina rush? What's that adding?
Where? That even if it's sitting in his property for a long time, he can't claim that I built it l'chatchila. I can only say so if I have edim, right? He doesn't say anything about lakuach, but he says that. Okay, therefore, right? The Mishnah said that because it fell, and because they made the din l'chatchila, that they have to build it together. Therefore, if it falls many years later, the space and the stone belong to both of them. Ri says, this is that good quoting the Tosafos, it seems, the Lishna Basra, according to the first opinion, according to the second opinion of Hezek Re'iyah, and that's why they had to build it together. The Lishna Kama, according to the first opinion, that Hezek Re'iyah, Lashme Hezek, the reason why they're splitting it is because the Yadua Sheikh Nuzeh, because we have record, we know that they made a kinyan to do it together. The Eloi Hani timing, because if not for these two reasons, in other words, if not for the Lefichach, if we're to fall into the property of one of them, the show is man harbe, and it stayed for a long time, Tosafos' opinion, then it's in his reshus. So it belongs to him now, and the other guy's he's an expropriator, and he's a moitzi v'chaveri, he has to prove. Miu bizman muat, but in a short time, it's not a chazaka, again, this is like Tosafos that assumes that shutfin lekop ya'adadi is a known fact before you read the Mishnah. And therefore the Lefichach must be adding a new layer, and the new layer is afilu sho har bezman. Okay, let's stop over here. So this is like a recap, at least in the sense of where we stand in terms of Rashi and Tosafos. We had one new inyan that the Tzemach Tzedek did introduce us to. This idea, if the person claims lo kuach biyadi, I bought it, that at least according to the one opinion here that we quoted, Tzemach Tzedek is going to make a shtickle pulpul to see where everybody else stands. But according to at least one opinion, if I claim I bought it, considering that it's been sitting on my property for so long, and I can no longer say shutfin lekop ya'adadi, and I am not denying the anan sadi, your witnesses, which is essentially your lefichach, which claims, which yells, which says that when you built it lechatchila, you must have split the property because that's halacha. I'm not denying that. I'm saying yes, takazai, but lakuachu, I bought it. According to what opinion, Muhammad is believed. So according to this one opinion, it's a way out of the din of the Mishnah. If one guy claims lakuachu only after sitting for so long, they'll look up that. Stop over here. And I guess we'll finish next week. So maybe want to talk to you about the Seder for next week. Before we get there, I want to ask, this, as I was reading this, I reminded myself, in the back of my head, I remember reading somewhere that according to Rashi, when the Mishnah says Hamakim ba'avonim, it actually just means the avonim. But because it says avonim, it also said makim, but it actually doesn't mean makim, because the makim anyways belongs, it's supposed to both of them. Was that in the book of Yosef? Where did we learn that? Does anyone remember this? Does this ring a bell? Ring a bell anywhere? That this is in my head. As I was reading the Tzemach Tzedek, it just popped into my head. We must have read somewhere that according to Rashi, for sure, maybe even according to others, that the Mishnah did not have to say the word makim. Because obviously the makim belongs to both of them, because the property line is the property line. But because it says avonim, it also says makim. If that's the case, it would go very well with what we said earlier about the Rashi over here. Do you remember this? Nobody remembers this? Is it ringing a bell for anybody? Maybe it was in the Mukha Yosef that we learned. I don't remember where this is, but I remember reading it. It's in my head somewhere.
I think we learned something
It rings a bell?
along those lines, but not that. I don't recall it saying it doesn't have to say makim.
But the makim is only agav avonim.
The Mukha we learned was about the positioning of the wall. If it's drawn, no, like if it's not in the middle.
Right.
How would you
be there? No.
But I don't recall it saying the end. It doesn't have to say in the Mishnah the word makim.
Anyway, if you remember it, please let me know. Okay, so for next week, so Wednesday, we'll have a shiur. We'll finish the Tzemach Tzedek, and then I was thinking of doing maybe an inyan and nigla related to Purim. I have some ideas, but maybe an inyan nigla related to Purim, and then Thursday night, maybe a Zoom verbringen. Purim. So let me know what you guys think.
Yeah.
If we can have a verbringen in MTC for 10 people, we're okay, no?
After 8 o'clock is curfew.
Not after 8 o'clock.
Oh, curfew! I forgot about that.
Yeah. Okay, gute Nacht.
Go ahead, thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, ciao. So see you.